Washington Journal continues.
We want to welcome Eric Olson. He is with the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Studies as we focus on Latin America and in particular those unaccompanied minors who are coming to the U.S. Across the Mexican border. Let me begin though with some news on this Sunday morning from the LA Times. The president to seek $2 billion to stem the surge of those Central American immigrants. The president will be asking Congress to give immigration officials broader powers to speed up the deportation of unaccompanied minors and parents along with children. And also the president saying he will need the additional money to try to figure out a deportation process, also dealing with the humanitarian needs of these young children.
Yeah, it's a incredible story, unexpected in many ways. 52,000 young people, minors, have shown up at the border since October of last year, maybe as many as another 60,000 coming before the end of the year. And so the processing that normally takes place with these children is overwhelming the people on the ground, and they're not able to handle it as quickly as they might. And so they've started to have to hold them in detention facilities that are overcrowded. And so it's creating another problem, which is big holding facilities of young people until they can figure out what to do with them.
Eric Olson, let's take a step beyond the headline.
Yeah.
You were in South America recently. What is happening? Why are these young children coming to the U.S.? Why are their parents allowing them to come? What is the economic situation that's driving them to do this?
Well, there are probably three factors, maybe more, but at least three factors. First, there's historic migration from Central America. This is a region that in the 80s and 90s suffered from civil war, civil conflict, and so there was an enormous amount of migration out of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And so some of it is a historic pattern, people wanting to reunite with their family members, their parents, and so that's one factor. The second factor is economic, as you alluded to. This is a region that's extremely poor, has suffered from a great deal of poverty and inequality there. Just to give you an example, UNICEF says that 50% of Guatemalan children under the age of 5 suffer from chronic malnutrition. 80% of children under the age of 5 in rural Guatemala suffer from chronic malnutrition. So there's a tremendous amount of economic duress and problems in that region. And the third, and this is the more recent phenomenon, has been a dramatic increase in homicides and violence related to two things. One, drug trafficking, and the other, gangs in those countries. Some of those gangs were actually deported from the United States back to Central America, and they've become a source of enormous violence there. And that's been leading to a continual increase in migration from that northern triangle of Central America, Guatemala, Salvador, and Honduras, since 2008. That's been going up steadily. Now, the other question which you alluded to is why these children are leaving now and why are they going on their own. That's a little more difficult to know. Part of it is, again, this need to reunite with their family members. But the other part of it is that rumors have gotten started in Central America that somehow the United States is going easy on children if they show up at the borders. I think there is misinformation. The coyotes, the traffickers, manipulated the story, tried to encourage people to go now. This is your moment. The U.S. is being easy. Obviously, they're not held to truth in advertising standards as traffickers, so they'll say whatever they need to say to get people to go. And all those factors together, I think, have led to this surprising exodus of young people from the region.
Let's go back to the map because I want you to explain how they're getting from Ecuador and Honduras through Mexico to the U.S. border.
Well, they're going, I mean, obviously depends where they're coming from, but El Salvador and Honduras are the southern two countries. They're coming through Guatemala, up across the Guatemalan-Mexican border. Periodically, some go through Belize on their way as well, but really overland is the preferred route. There are two trains that leave from southern Mexico, two different points, and many people jump on those trains, ride those trains on the top of the train. Very perilous journey. Many people die. There are gangs that try to control those trains and force people to pay passage, in an unofficial way. Otherwise, they take buses and walk and hop on trucks and whatever they can do to make it through Mexico, which is a very long journey to the U.S. border.
And are most coming from Guatemala and Honduras?
Yes, they're coming. Most of them are coming from Honduras. Honduras has the highest homicide rate in the world right now, 90 per 100,000. Extraordinarily high. The UN says anything over 20 per 100,000 is warlike in nature, so they're at 90 per 100,000. Secondly is Guatemala, and thirdly El Salvador. All those three countries together are the most violent countries in the world not currently at war.
Complicating all of this are some of the diseases that these children are bringing in, swine flu and hepatitis. How do we deal with that?
Well, that's why it's important for there to be a lot of screening. Well, obviously, the first step is to try to discourage them from coming, for there to be more programs in their countries that would discourage them from coming along the way. But once they're in the United States and in detention, that's why there's a screening process, not only in terms of a legal hearing, but also there should be health care screening, because sending a child back to Honduras with swine flu can just simply create another epidemic in Honduras that doesn't help anyone either. So I think the first step has to be dealing with root causes in those three countries and then screening along the way.
Jeh Johnson is the Homeland Security Secretary. He testified on Capitol Hill, getting some tough questions from members of Congress, including this from Congressman Mike Rogers of Alabama.
Now we have a crisis, and I don't see this administration doing anything about it other than trying to house the children. And I understand the humanitarian basis for that, but we need to send a signal to these other countries that it's not going to work. You can't send your children up here and let them stay. We're going to turn them right back and give them right back to you. That's what I'm looking for from you, as a way for us to do that. That's the clearest signal to these parents to not send these children up like this in the future. So tell me what you can do other than give them to HHS. Nothing? Have you called the National Guard out or asked for it?
Well, like I said, I'd like to consider every option that is presented. I went through in my prepared testimony the 12 or 13 steps we've taken to deal with the crisis, which includes building more detention space.
But that's once they get in here. The president, the Speaker of the House last week called on the president to mobilize the National Guard, to go down there and give some relief to the Border Patrol and to FEMA in this crisis. Why can't you call on the president to do that?
Well, sir, if you're asking me if I can take an unaccompanied child, turn them around in the border, and send them right back to Guatemala, I don't believe the law would permit us to do that.
Eric Olson.
Well, it's a very complicated situation. There's no question about it. Obviously, the congressman would like the U.S. government and the administration to be more aggressive on this front. In many ways, they have been. Vice President Biden went to Guatemala a little over a week ago and said in a very stern statement to the public in Central America that this was a dangerous thing. The U.S. was not going to admit children. And President Obama yesterday said basically the same thing: don't send your children. The problem is that message sometimes falls on deaf ears when people are desperate, when their children are being killed in their communities, when they're faced with gang violence, low possibilities of economic future opportunity, and so it's a real tug of war. Is the solution on the border? No, I don't think the solution to this problem is on the border. I think the U.S. could do more in terms of processing these children once they arrive, processing them more quickly. But some of these children do have a legitimate claim to come into the United States. And let me give you an example. We know, the president said yesterday, that there are traffickers of children in Central America involved in child trafficking. And if those children are here because they did not have wasn't their choice necessarily, we have an obligation to hear them out and deal with that criminal activity. That's part of what was in the president's message yesterday. I'm not saying they're all in that boat, not at all. But there are clearly people that are here not because they chose to be, but because in some ways they were brought. And those situations need to be taken care of too.
If you live in a southern border state, we want to hear from you, and that phone number is 202-585-3883. Our guest is Eric Olson, who is with the Woodrow Wilson Center. His specialty is on border issues. He's the Associate Director of the Latin American Program at the Wilson Center, a graduate of Trinity College and American University. Chris is joining us from Brooklyn, New York. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for C-SPAN.
Sure.
Good morning on this Sunday. A couple of quick comments. First, we don't have an obligation to take care of the children of the world. Their parents do. Their parents are the ones trafficking them. And something else, you put that map up again. This is a highly organized effort to bring tens of thousands of people across the U.S. border. This is not some haphazard event. And Homeland Security put out a request for proposal back in January anticipating this many people coming. Can you confirm that Homeland Security request for proposal to deal with this back in January, 6 months ago? And also, talk about the traffickers. These aren't unaccompanied children. These a 5-year-old not getting on a bus in Guatemala and going to the desert of Texas, okay? These parents have an obligation to their children. I, in New York, do not.
Well, I mean, I certainly understand the frustration, and I'm simply saying that some of these children, not all of them, have been trafficked, either through sex trafficking or other kind of trafficking, and as a result, we need to be able to try to distinguish what the motivation for their coming was, and that's what's going on at the border now. People are going through a hearing process, an initial hearing process. They're being released to a parent or a relative and then asked to come back to court. That process takes a while, and I think that's where the administration is trying to change the dynamic so that there's not an impression that you're given a free pass into the United States, that the hearing takes place at the detention facility, and that there's a determination whether it's a legitimate claim or not. That's the question.
This follow-up from Laura, who says, so the children, would they qualify as refugees or not?
Well, refugee status is something that the UN determines, and in this case, the UN has not designated these as refugees. They may have claims to political asylum, however, if they're fleeing persecution, fleeing particular violence in their homeland. I've been an expert witness on some of these cases where people have a legitimate claim that if they're deported, they will be killed. But that's not the case of all. A vast majority of these cases will not meet the standard of political asylum and will likely be deported.
Jan has this point. She makes the comment. You can share your thoughts at C-SPAN's WJ, our Twitter page. Obviously, the way to stop this is more resources in their home countries, keep them safe, and educate them. Let's go to John in West Palm Beach, Florida. Good morning.
Good morning. This has been going on for many years. This is no secret. It's a family reunification plan by the Obama administration. It started in 2008 as soon as he got elected. And everybody knows about this. In my own county, Palm Beach County, the sheriff's office actually has a program with the Guatemalan community here that gives them identification. And what I mean by identification, I work for the Postal Service, and for the last 2 years, we've been flooded with passports through a third party out of Miami from Guatemala. And this is a concerted effort to give people in this country illegally identification. And this, I don't know why people have to dance around this issue. It's quite clear that what they're trying to do is reunify the children with the people that are here illegally.
Is that the case?
Well, I wouldn't say that's the Obama administration's goal necessarily. The law says that if you're here legally in the United States, there's a process whereby you could be reunified with your family over time. It's a very lengthy process. Those who are here without documents, are here illegally, don't have any right to reunification. Now, the motivation of the children and the parents, whether they're here legally or not, is to be reunified, to come together. But I don't necessarily agree that that's the Obama administration's policy. In fact, they've said quite the opposite and have said that they're going to deport these children.
Another comment from a viewer who says the U.S. is largely responsible for the violence south of the border. These children are the victims of our policies. Our next caller is from Killeen, Texas. Pete is on the phone. Good morning.
Good morning. I thought I heard Mr. Wilson say that there's great wealth disparity down there in those countries. And that makes me think of Mexico with its wealth of resources. And the ruling class doesn't seem to be able to share and keep domestic tranquility in their country. I wonder why the State Department hasn't been involved through diplomatic channels to get this under control and sanctions to these countries who can't provide for, or won't provide for their population and share these their wealth so that they have a future and don't have to come to our country. But I understand it. It's such that Walmart and McDonald's has people applying for welfare because they don't want to take care of their responsibilities either.
Thank you, Pete.
It is true that much of the origins of this problem lie in Central America, and the inability of the governments there to create a situation of economic opportunity for their citizens, situation of stability and peace. There have been enormous problems in Central America for decades now. In Congress, I do think it's more at the level of rumor, manipulation by the traffickers that suggests now's your opportunity, and doesn't go beyond that.
Is it even feasible to close the border between Mexico and Honduras or Mexico and Guatemala?
It's not at all feasible. I mean, I think some people have the notion that you could close that border. Listen, as I said earlier, the U.S. spends $18 billion a year to protect its border, and we have not closed our border. To think that Mexico and Guatemala are going to do the same is just, not realistic in the least. Neither of the countries want to do that. They depend on each other. There's an enormous amount of labor that flows between Guatemala and southern Mexico. Mexicans depend on Guatemalan labor for their agriculture fields, their domestic labor. So this notion that somehow the border between Mexico and Guatemala is going to be closed down is not very realistic.
Jay from Simi Valley, California. Good morning to you.
Good morning, C-SPAN. I believe that the United States bears direct responsibility for this because of our addiction to illegal drugs. The millions and millions of dollars that go down to these countries and corrupt the governments, the militaries, and the police forces, and create the tremendous amount of violence is our responsibility because of our addiction to drugs.
I would tend to agree to some extent with what the caller says. There's no question that part of what's going on in that region has to do with our demand for drugs in the United States. We're the largest consumer market of illegal drugs, cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, coming through those areas, and it has a profound effect, not only on the people of that region, but the money that comes with it, as the caller suggests, corrupts people, infiltrates the banking system, weakens government. All those things are an issue.
Our last call comes to us from New York City. Della, good morning.
Good morning. I'm wondering how much our trade policies, NAFTA and CAFTA, have brought about this increase in immigration from Central America and Mexico. We used to have a trade surplus with them where we bought the agricultural products and they bought our manufactured goods. Now we ship down our factories down there and we threw them into low-wage factory jobs, and so they're forced to come up here for employment.
Well, Central America still benefits from some provisions that gives them preferential treatment when it comes to textiles, clothing, and that sort of thing. There is enormous concern that might end in the near future, and that they will lose a lot of jobs. But they do still benefit from protected status on certain industries and certain products. And I think that's an important thing, to keep jobs and create jobs in those countries.
One quick follow-up, because you brought this issue up earlier from one of our viewers, Didi, who says, are the trafficker gangs, are they paid for their services? And I would add to that, how are they paid?
they're paid for their services, and worse than that, I'll just give you an example. You might give them $2,000 to take your child, your brother, whatever, up to the United States. Along the way, sometimes they begin to extort you. Where is your family in Chicago? Where's your family in Houston? And they'll start calling them and say, if you want your son, your daughter free, send me another $500. Sometimes they're forced to carry drugs as well. So it's a trafficking flow network that also extorts and also carries drugs. That doesn't happen to every case, but this is happening.
Eric Olson of the Wilson Center, thank you for explaining what is a complicated and growing situation. We appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you very much.